Megan, welcome aboard to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Megan, you are sending you back to your past, 18, 20 something. You're like, oh, I'm going to learn criminology. Why? Why do that to yourself?
I know. I mean, the real answer, honestly, is that I was that only child who stayed up late watching crime shows with my mom because we didn't watch like cartoons in the house. We watched LA Law and other, dramas, court shows, cop shows, and I mean, I fell in love with it at an early age, and it's funny because it really did stick with me. I thought, like, in my world, I was gonna be a prosecutor, and that's kind of where my ambition began, but didn't it?
When you kind of had this, okay, you studied, you moved from, LA Law or CSI, whatever your drug
LA
of
Law,
that.
LA Law.
And then you study, you step into the real world. What are the disillusions, or what are the things that you kind of, all of us as CSI advocates believe, which just ain't true?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, that, CSI, CSI agents or technicians are both police and CSI. Like they both bust down doors and they run lab work and everything is done in this dramatic fashion and all crimes are solved, all crimes involve forensics. Most of it is pretty much a myth, and that all of it is perfect science. In fact, DNA is probably the only thing that is not so much fallible. Everything else is really subjective. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway.
What are the, I mean, I think we all, right, we've all come to know about DNA, but what are the other, let's say, fallible techniques and tools that are in the
Oh gosh.
toolkit?
Okay. There's a bunch. So we call them junk sciences, most of them. And one of them, I think that the biggest one might come to mind is bite mark analysis. So the
Mm,
idea that you can match someone's bite mark. It's like an identical replica and whatnot. That is complete junk. It is just subjective. Hair comparison analysis was something that was done back in the day. And so people thought that was very, oh, you match the hair, right?
mm.
The way that was done was really like, I take a strand of your hair, I take a strand of my hair, I look at them. Oh, they look the same color, they look just about as thick, they look, similar. So hair analysis used to be for fire or arson.
Mhm.
There was investigations that were done and they called it science, but really it was just looking at like burn patterns and pore patterns, which is totally not scientific for fires. You have to replicate the conditions. So it's like
Mm.
experimental in order to really say something is done like that. Even fingerprint analysis, that's still subjective. That still requires
Really?
an analyst to match fingerprints on multiple levels. So we have like ridges and whorls, different parts of our fingerprints, but you have to match it on 8 points, 10 points, 12 points, and some examiners will go with the lower level points, some will go with higher levels.
Mm.
So it's not nothing really is an exact science, pretty much except DNA.
How much of this has been, so fingerprints is interesting because you would think that, oh, this is now computerized, goes into computer, they say, I mean, this is what we're seeing on CSI, right? 98% match, right? Are people still doing this manually?
So there are computer programs that do the matches, but it is still ultimately up to a person, a human, to
Mm.
determine if the match is true and how many points it matches on. So it's not an exact science. It's not like we all have 100 points that match. It's really a little trickier than that, and I think
Mm.
people don't really realize that. And also, I mean, like you see on TV, it's just not that exciting. Like fingerprint analysts and other technicians, they're sitting in a lab, they have microscopes and other things, and that's the way it's done. They pass that information along to police who work on it. Sometimes there isn't any DNA. A lot of times there's not DNA. A lot of times there aren't fingerprints. And even if fingerprints are available, sometimes the crimes just don't warrant them. The crimes have to be very serious to warrant all this type of scientific evidence.
What is this? Is this a budgetary thing? Is this why? What is the warrant aspect of it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's budgetary for sure because there's
Mm,
a DNA backlog. Absolutely, that happens. It's really the severity of the crime. Look, if you have a homicide, if you have high
mm,
level violent crimes, of course they're going to do a full crime scene sweep. But if we're talking about a lower level theft. There are a number of property crimes that are actually way more common than violent crimes
mm.
that aren't going to warrant that type of scientific analysis because it's very costly and it takes time.
Interesting. So again, this is the show of the art of going down rabbit holes. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that for a second. So
that's okay.
I want to get back on track. Um, so you're early in your career. You're now going through real world experiences. What is one of your, I don't know, maybe wins, like your best win, or maybe your worst horror story? Either way, up to you.
Well, first, let me start. So, you talk about early in my career. Let me just say, I got a degree in political science and thought that I was going to be a prosecutor. And when I came out of my 4-year degree, I worked as a paralegal for a couple of years and decided, oh, hell no, I'm not working with lawyers. I'm not going to be a lawyer. Like, it was out for me. But I loved the criminal justice
So
system.
we all
So,
have we all hate lawyers, but what was your personal pet peeve?
oh, I had I worked in these very big litigation firms and I worked for some of the worst um, attorneys in terms of temper tantrums,
Mm,
demands. I couldn't believe how many accomplished attorneys threw temper tantrums and acted so infantile. I was so surprised. It really did blow my mind, some of the things that they demanded. I worked sometimes as a paralegal like a couple days in a row without going home, no shower. I
oh
was sick
wow.
all the time. It was rough. So, it wasn't the hard part that hard is fine, but it wasn't rewarding. Nobody was ever grateful. I mean, it just was I worked in just I did not have good experiences. So, but I also knew, frankly, working on litigation and briefs, things of
Mm,
that nature, it wasn't for me. But I loved the criminal justice system. So
yeah.
I wound up going to an open house at a master's program at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in
Mm.
Manhattan, which is a great school for criminal justice. And I fell in love with the program. I got my master's. I had this professor, this older, retired, I remember, federal probation officer. I loved him. He was great. And he kept telling me, Sacks, you have to take the probation exam. You're going to love it. So I actually did. I took the I sat for US probation. At the same time, I had applied for an investigator position with the district attorney's office, which is a very
Mm,
prestigious job. And
mm.
I was very surprised that I actually made it through and got offers from both. So this was a dream come true to get like offers from two amazing jobs.
Nice.
Ultimately, I chose the federal probation position. I don't know. I guess it was my professor who impacted me, and so that's where my real career began. And that was in 2003. So it's about 22 years ago is
Mm.
how I actually started. A lot's happened since then. So I just wanted to give you that background. But you asked me what for a horror story? Is that what
Yeah,
you're looking for?
sure. Let's go for,
Uh,
well, could be a win, right? But horror stories are great too.
I mean, I have a couple of like that's as a federal probation officer, I was dealing with some people who were convicted on very serious crimes. So, I
Mm,
mean, I've definitely been in situations where um, executing a search warrant, let's say, and, a dog tries to kill you, literally tries to maul you. And one of your colleagues maces a dog and that gets chased down the street and, you think they're going to get killed. I've been in situations where the lights have gone out in an apartment and people are scuffling
So
and
wait,
you
hold
wonder,
on.
are
So
they
why the probation officer is on the warrant? Why is that?
No, no, no. We're executing a search warrant as probation
Okay.
officers, but we had
Wouldn't an
to
officer do that? Like, why is the probation officer executing the search warrant?
because it was a violation of probation.
Got it. Okay.
So, as probation officers, we're visiting with someone who was non-compliant.
Right.
And actually, you can pretty much search if someone's under probation. You can
Mm,
search. But as I recall, the officer on this case, and I was backup, was being extra careful and
Mm.
making sure that everything was in order. So I think he got a warrant. And um, I've been at a place where we had a sex offender who crawled out the fire escape, and we had a chase a little bit. There have been a number of, situations, you might say. Um, I don't recall. I remember being like appropriately afraid, you know what I mean? Like a
Yeah.
little bit of fear, but also prepared. I had really good training, so I was really prepared for a lot of these situations. But I think it was also like interesting the first time I sat down with my first convicted serial murderer.
Mm.
I was like, okay, well, I'm a probation officer, and I'm investigating this person who has killed at least 3 people, and we're sitting in the same room together, and there's nothing separating us, right? We're on this there's no guard, there's no window, like, anything could happen, so it
What
can
were you
get
feeling at that moment?
the first time I was very young too, so I would also
What
preface
how old
that,
were you?
let's see, so I think I was 24, the first time I sat in a room, 24 or 25.
Mm.
And for a probation officer to sit in with, on a serious murder case, that's pretty young. You're not really seasoned yet, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Sorry, something in my eye. Um, so I was young, and I think I had an appropriate amount of fear. I felt confident. I knew that I was trained, but still, there was a
I love that expression, the appropriate amount of fear. What is the explain that to us.
all
What's an
right.
inappropriate amount of fear and what's an appropriate amount of fear?
All right. So there
Hey, I
is
would be
no
scared shitless sitting with a
okay.
serial killer, I gotta tell you.
There's no appropriate, like, it's appropriate for me. So I
Yeah,
wasn't terrified that I was shaking and I had to leave the room,
right.
right? But I had like a healthy fear, like be on
Yeah,
guard, know that something can go wrong, and you maybe have trained a little bit, but that's not
right.
you're young and you're naive and you're not even naive, but you're new. So
Mm,
for me, it was like healthy fear, which
fair enough.
probably kept me safe.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So I wanna fast forward. Long career, reflecting over those years, how do you kind of see that career now in this kind of dynamics between criminals serving their time, coming out back into the world, going through a process with you, and then trying to remake their lives? Does the system work? Doesn't the system work? Where's it broken? What's your pains?
Yeah, the system is entirely broken, I can tell you that. It does not work very well here because 75%, 70 to 75% of people will go back within 3 years to prison, which means it doesn't work. But I can tell you that from the start of my career to now, my views are entirely different. When I worked as a probation officer, I viewed punishment differently. I
Mm,
viewed prison differently. And since flipping to the other side, working in academia, researching, working in prisons, meeting with offenders on an entirely different level, I've been able to see what real rehabilitation looks like, what it can
mm.
look like, what it entails, how it can be done, and it can be done. We do a really crappy job in the United States. One of the best innovations,
Oh,
or
hold on. There's a lot to unpack there. Um,
oh, okay,
so
sorry,
okay,
okay,
this is a lot of good stuff. So you said your opinions changed between
yeah,
young and today as it came
yes,
to punishment and probation.
yes.
Why don't we just focus on the punishment for a second? How so?
I think I was very in favor of punishment for every crime when I began my career in law enforcement, and that's a law
Mm,
enforcement orientation as well. You're way
mm,
more punitive when you work in law enforcement,
mm,
and it's because you see a lot of things.
right.
And I did see a lot of people who deserve to be punished, but I also what happened was I saw a lot of people who were very poor,
Mm,
a lot of people who were very sick, drug addicted, that weren't, they're not monsters. These are
right.
people. And I began to see punishment as not appropriate for all offenders. It wasn't the right thing to fix people per
Mm,
se. And I worked in a system that I thought was too punitive and had really harsh punishments for people who really were not the worst offenders. And I think that was part of the impetus for me to move over to academia because I
Mm,
thought, oh, I can research, I can critique the system, I can teach students about what the realities are. Like, I just thought there was so much more I could do on the other side.
mm,
And so I do think that I became less punitive. However, I will say that I don't think rehabilitation is appropriate for everyone. I think
mm,
punishment is appropriate in certain cases, but my views on punishment definitely change in terms of it shouldn't be punishment for everyone. It's not one solution for everything. What you really have to look at is what's causing crime, what's the main driver of it, is it, are we just labeling people criminals? So is it actually that there's something causing people to commit crime, or are we
mm.
just calling things crime? And so that's how my
Let's
views have
let's let's
changed.
unpack. Let me play the devil's advocate here. You are now state your potential argument. Tell me if I get it. 75% of the people who go down this punishment route will never come out of it. They'll be back in prison within 3 years.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't go down this rat hole if it's not effective. The devil's advocate view here that I want to present is, well, the punishment is a deterrent. If it becomes easier or if the punishment isn't so severe, are we not increasing the, let's say, economic pipeline of the amount of people who are now
Yep.
willing to do crimes? So the more
Yeah.
severe the punishment, then the less people who might attempt it. So is there just simple math here that you need severe punishments just as a deterrent?
Well, that's a great question, but if you think about your question, it's kind of flawed because if punishment was a deterrent, why do 75% of people return? We are actually one of the most punitive nations in the
Mm,
world. I think we hold like um 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. We are almost number one in incarceration. We are a highly punitive nation in terms of incarceration. But if it was a deterrent, 75% of people wouldn't. The deterrent argument is broken by the
mm,
sheer number of recidivism, and that's the problem. It's just not working, and it's not just incarceration. It's the collateral consequences that follow incarceration. So it's coming out with a record, and then
mm,
everyone knows your record. It's coming out with losing access to housing, to
mm,
welfare benefits, to food stamps. There are all these barriers once people leave prison that's part of the problem as well. But it's just prison is not a deterrent. You can't argue that in pretty much in
mm.
our country if that many people return.
So I mean, the return could be related to so many other issues. As you said, it's what
Mhm.
happens after you come back, and
Right.
but the 20% number worries me. So you said 5% of the world population, 20% find themselves in it.
Tw-
Is that because
25.
25? Is that because so many people are returning, or are we actually incarcerating more people per se, with excluding the amount of people that are returning? Because if we're incarcerating the same amount as the rest of the world,
No.
ignoring returning, then we have a return issue. But if we're incarcerating more, like, what does the rest of the world look like?
We incarcerate more, and that's because of I'm sorry, since the 1990s, we
Mm,
started when we got tough on crime, law and order in the 1990s. We began to incarcerate people. We passed a number of mandatory minimum sentences for drug
mm,
offenders and other crimes. We got extremely punitive, and
mm,
so it drove up our incarceration rate substantially. In 1975, we incarcerated I think we had about 200 to 250,000 people incarcerated in the U.S. Currently, we have 2.3 million. If
sheesh.
you add the people who are on probation and parole, that number goes to over 7 million, so close to 2% of our population. We have two problems. One is that we incarcerate more people since the 90s and that more people return because of that. And one of the things that, or one of the ways that we've attempted to reduce incarceration now, because it's so escalated, is to stop incarcerating people because of minor probation or parole infractions.
Mm,
So when I worked as a probation officer, like, you didn't bring probation officers can use discretion. You really didn't
Mm,
bring someone, let's say someone comes in and are on probation and they fail a urine test for smoking marijuana. Really, you don't bring them in front of the court to send them back to prison. That's like you set a new rule, you set something else. For quite a while, there was a number of technical infractions that were sending people back to prison, and
mm,
judges and everyone started saying, "Stop, it's enough." Like, we're
mm.
not sending people back to prison for years because they broke a curfew or failed one drug test. Like,
Right.
we have to figure out this problem. So we have two problems, and both of those you acknowledged.
Why is this about the minimum sentences? I mean, what does this look like in the rest of the world? I- Is there more discretion in the judicial
Yeah.
systems? How do we kind of compare when we look side to side?
So I can tell you this. First of all, let me just state I'm a domestic criminologist, so
Mm,
I'm not great with the global. Like, I can't compare other countries per se. I
mm,
can compare similar countries, and I can tell you that there are a number of countries that have decriminalized drugs, and that
mm,
is most definitely responsible for lesser rates. We also have a lot more guns. Guns are
mm,
part of the problem. There's no doubt about that. We have a very big gap between social classes, and that is part of the problem as well. Um, Other countries there are some places that are more rehabilitative, certainly less punitive. So if you've heard like some of the big trials that you follow, you might hear about someone getting a sentence for 150 years.
mm,
So there are a number of countries that do not use that kind of logic. They think that's ridiculous. Why would we
mm,
sentence someone to 150 years? No one's going to live that long, right? Or not
right.
yet, anyway. So there is like a max of 30 years.
Mm.
So there are many different approaches that I will say are a lot more sensible than the ones that we use here.
And what's the difference, or maybe if we focus domestically, what are the challenges in rehabilitation? I mean, 75%, that's just incredibly
Huge.
high.
It's one of the main things is how punitive we are afterwards. Like I was talking about these collateral
Mm,
consequences. I think a number of people, offenders who plead guilty, well, also plea bargains, pleading guilty, 95% of people plead guilty, and they don't
mm.
realize what's going to happen afterward.
Hold on. Explain that to me. 95% plea guilty. What is that? How is that even possible? What does that mean?
Isn't this crazy? So everyone thinks the trial is like the hallmark of justice in the United States. You always see every
Right.
show has like a trial.
Yeah. Well,
Only
Hollywood taught us
5
that.
right. Only 5% of people will ever go to trial because the incentives and the pressure is too great. Like, plea bargaining is how our system runs.
So what's the
Um,
incentives? Tell us more about this.
so there's incentives on both sides. Obviously, defense attorneys, especially if you're a public defender, you are overworked, underpaid, your
Mm,
caseload is extreme. 85% of people in state courts are indigent, so they cannot afford an attorney, so they rely on
mm,
public defenders who have way too many cases, like, really. They are overworked, and their incentives are they just cannot go to trial. They can't handle that.
mm,
So getting a plea deal is the best they can probably do for the most part. And then prosecutors, they have a lot more power. They get paid a
mm,
lot more money. They have less
mm,
cases. They're in a much better position. But the benefit for them is most prosecutors are not judged for what we consider justice. They are judged for what's a conviction. That's a win. So
mm,
a plea bargain is a conviction is a win for them. So they can say you know what I mean? That's a win.
mm,
So for both sides, it represents a win, but it's not at all what I would say is the most or the best part of our justice system. In fact, I think it's horribly flawed, and I think prosecutors, even though I know some good prosecutors, and I don't mean to speak ill of them, but I think it just places too much power in their hands.
mm. So let's say I'm a criminal. I'm about to make, or I should say alleged. I'm about to make this decision. Um, should I or should I not go to trial? Let's say I am guilt free. I know that, I believe it. I want to prove it to the world. Why would I take a plea bargain? Is it
Right,
is it
because
financial costs that are going to crush me? What is it?
there are any number of things, but really the truth is, even when you're innocent,
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of people are convicted that are innocent. If you know anything about wrongful convictions, you would
Hmm.
know now that you have a good chance of being convicted. And when people are convicted, they face what we call a trial penalty, meaning
Hmm.
that they're punished even more harshly for just going to trial and
Hmm.
exercising their right to do so.
Hmm.
There's a definite penalty for doing that. So it's not, the
So
odds
they're
are
giving
not.
some incentive to take the plea bargain, basically.
I okay, let me just give you an example. I actually sat in on I sat in on hearings all the time because as part of my research, I also study bail hearings and plea bargaining. That's part of my research. So I sat in. It was last year on a couple of trials and hearings, and I remember a lawyer standing up with his client. He was charged with some type of fraud. And I don't know what level it was, so I couldn't tell you, but it wasn't terribly serious.
Hmm.
And he stood up and said, the judge asked, "Has there been a plea?" And the prosecutor said, "We've offered him 6 months in jail."
Hmm.
Okay. So the defense attorney stood up and said, "Your Honor, my client does not want to serve 6 months, and he would like to exercise his right to go to trial." And the
Hmm.
judge said, "Really? Has he really thought about this?" And he
Holy
said,
shit.
"Yes, he has. We've discussed it." The judge said, "I'm going to tell you to go home and think about this again because if your client comes back and decides to go to trial and is found guilty, I'm going to sentence him to something way harsher than that. So he should really consider this." That was a warrant. First of all, that's illegal. Judge should never say that, but it's fine. Basically telling him, if you don't take this plea, I'm going to sentence you to so much
Yeah.
worse that you better go home and take this plea. And that's the way our system works.
Yeah, that I mean, I don't know anything about the law, but that didn't feel good just hearing it. So
It wasn't.
I mean, there is that if there, but yeah, it makes a very stark case, and like you're hearing this from the judge, the person who's supposed to make the decision, like that doesn't feel good as the person who believes or knows that you're innocent, right?
Well, I
Um,
didn't go back for the Monday because that was like a Friday or Thursday, and it was a Monday
mm,
hearing. I didn't go back, but I can bet anything that he took that plea because his lawyer told him, "Look, this judge is going to punish you. You don't take that
mm.
plea, he's going to punish you. You're going to get a year, 2 years, whatever you're going to like the maximum." And so that's like the coercive nature of the system. It's terrible. I was,
How,
and you know what? I will tell you another thing. Oh, sorry. And I just give you one more story. You said
no,
horrible
no, go
stuff.
ahead.
When I was writing my dissertation on bail decisions, I sat in on a number of bail hearings in Newark, New Jersey, which
Mm,
used to have a very high crime rate. It's better now. Still can be it's high voluminous. The defendants go through the courts, and I sat in on a couple of hearings, and the judge, I'll never forget, actually called on me and said, "Who are you?" in my gallery. He's been sitting here. And I told him who I was, and he said, "Come back into my chambers." And I was like, "Oh gosh, am I in trouble? Like, this is public. I can sit here, right?" So he wanted to know about my research, and I was
mm,
happy to explain it to him. But
mm.
he had just given a bail amount to a defendant who was charged with assaulting a nun.
That's a bad
So
choice.
it was not a good choice, right?
Yeah,
And the bail was $150,000.
yeah,
It
it's a lot
was
of money.
considered it was a simple assault, so it was like a hand, and there, as I understand it, the injuries were not serious.
Mm,
So the bail was a little bit high for that kind of assault.
yeah,
And the judge told me without me even asking, just so you know, I gave that guy $150,000 bail because I knew he couldn't pay it. If I thought he could have, I would have given him a lot higher. And that's completely illegal. That's what we call de facto preventive detention. And he had
right.
no problem stating that. And he said, "Put it in your paper." And I went, "Wow, that's our system."
So we don't want to end this show on a overly negative tone. I want to go to the 25%. The 25% that does not come back into the system.
Yeah.
Is it luck? is it that something went right in their rehabilitation? Like, what can we
Sure.
learn from that 25%?
Sure. There are things that go right, and, I will tell you optimistically, a number of the people that I work with are, in the lifers group, and that means that they are
Mm,
serving sentences of 30 years to life.
mm,
People who serve long sentences, like 20 years and above, are very unlikely to return to prison. They have been rehabilitated, they've aged out of crime, they've learned something. So it is age and experience. One of the other positive things in New Jersey, where I work, is that they've introduced serious college education into
mm.
prisons. So college education in prisons drastically changes the outcomes for
Oh,
people.
wow.
And in fact, it really changes the entire culture inside of prisons, changes the language, the motivation, everything.
Right.
So,
Tell us what this is really interesting. What does that
yeah,
look like? What is the before and after if you've been exposed to that
yeah.
where college program is introduced?
So
Because
it, mhm.
this sounds kind of crazy, like why? But then when I think about it, it's like, well, we're creating options here, right?
We're creating such great outcomes. Education has been linked to serious success after
Mm,
incarceration. And so what happens is professors like myself will offer classes inside
mm,
of a prison, and they are given not like all the degrees, but a couple different options for degrees. And prisoners who are the best prisoners have the best behavior, the best
mm,
records can apply.
mm,
And if they're accepted in the program, and they keep great behavior and they do well in the program, they have to maintain the same grades as
right.
college students that I teach, can complete a degree, which they can use on the outside. And so it changes behavior in prisons. And I have absolutely seen the difference between people who didn't really have much motivation or didn't really care very much about what happened. All of a sudden, these guys are educated, they're motivated, they're excited, and they're going to do so much better on the outside. And I can tell you anecdotally, I've seen
Mm.
a number of people cycle through these programs who have left prison and who are absolutely thriving, like doing very well and not return to prison. It's a game changer. So I will say, if you want to end on something positive, college education in prisons is a total game changer.
What do you think is driving that? Why does it make such a big difference?
I think that a number of people who are in prison, remember, they're in there for a long time. There aren't that
Mm,
many programs. There's not that many vocational things that people can do. They don't have great goals or things to do with their time, but now
mm,
there is an incentive. There's an excitement. So many of these people didn't have money or access to education on the outside, and all of a sudden, they find themselves in prison for a very long time. They're drug free now,
mm.
and doing a little bit better, but not finding something to kind of complete them and strive for, something to do on the outside. And now it's like a world of opportunity opens to them. And I've seen so many people go through the program that are just doing so well.
Do you have the numbers in regards to how many of our institutions, prisons have these programs versus don't have it? Is it like it's everywhere and it's just doing all
It's
that it
not
can,
everywhere.
or is there a huge
No.
opportunity here?
No, New Jersey is very progressive in that regard. They have education in a number of their prisons, most of their
Mm,
prisons. Not every state has it. All states have GED opportunities, but,
mm,
once you get your GED, if you're in prison for 10, 20 years, like, GED, that's it. I will
right.
say there are other very, good programs in some prisons that are not necessarily college, but I don't know if you've heard of, like, the, puppies in prison, the pet programs. So
No,
dog
what is?
training. Yeah,
Mm,
dog training has become, a thing in a lot of prisons across various states, and inmates who have good behavior are allowed to train dogs to be used in various situations as service dogs, in a number of other, ways, support dogs, even law enforcement dogs, believe it or not.
ironically.
I know, ironically, but
Yeah.
it's a long term commitment.
Mm,
And what happens is in a number of these programs, they are certified then. So when they leave
nice,
prison, they have certifications as dog trainers that they can
nice.
take to the outside. And the programs that I've looked at and the numbers, the research I've seen is shown that people who participate in those programs are highly also successful on the outside.
I would imagine that even if they don't become dog trainers on the outside, there's a therapeutic value there.
There are so many benefits, just like education is. Like it's the benefits can't be what's the word? Overstated? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Megan, thank you so much for coming on the show. We have only
Oh,
one question, which is scripted.
ah.
Uh, it's a difficult question because it's
Oof.
very personal.
Okay.
If you had to go back to 20-something-year-old Megan, what
Oh.
would you advise her?
Your first job won't be your last job. It's a long road. Don't be afraid of the change and don't be afraid of how your feelings will change about what you do.
Hmm.
And also, one of the things that I would tell myself, I wouldn't tell myself because I knew it, but I would tell someone else is don't be afraid sometimes to take big gambles and risks. I left a really comfy federal job for school and who I was poor again, and I remember my dad being like, "Are you crazy? This was the dream job." Sometimes you just have to, like, go big or go home. So I would tell
Yeah.
someone else that also.
Megan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate you
Thank you for
deeply.
having me. Thank you.